Hello. A lot of countries around the world have declared wars on crime or wars on drugs, for example, in the Philippines and in the United States. But let's not forget that every war against crime is only a war against people. And it's because Team Proposition believes that the prisoners sitting in our prisons deserve a choice about what punishment and what redemption they want, that we are so proud to propose today's motion. What am I going to give you in this speech? First, I'm going to give some framework, burdens, and definitions for today's round. And then I will deliver two substantive arguments, with my partner Shreyoshi delivering the third. With that in mind, let's begin. First, we as Team Proposition would implement a form of training and combative course established by the prisoner's residing country to train them before going into military mission. Once the course is completed, they are then eligible to participate in these dangerous military missions. We propose that for every one of these missions they partake in, they have a 20% reduction with every mission. However, this is not applicable for life sentences and death sentences, because there are no means to reduce those sentences. The burdens of today's round are as follows. First, the proposition must prove why this decision to choose is principally or practically good for prisoners, or why it's principally and practically good for society. The opposition, conversely, must prove why denying prisoners the right to choose is justifiable and has practical harms that will outweigh the benefits. We define dangerous as life-threatening, and we define a military mission as military activities under the armed forces. Our stance is this: we want to allow prisoners to choose their punishment and not get off scot-free. That's why we advocate for the right to autonomy to choose their punishment. Now we move on to our first substantive argument, which is on the principle level, promoting personal autonomy. Our first layer of analysis under this argument is the right to choose. We believe that when prisoners commit a crime, they don't suddenly stop being people. They are entitled to every human right that normal people are as well, with some of them restricted a little. Now, prisoners, because they have these basic human rights, for example, don't deserve to be murdered. They don't deserve to be raped. That's why we believe there should be a standard of living for the prisoners in these prisons. We believe that the right to choose is like this, a fundamental right. And we believe that in order for them to pay penance for what they have done, they should be able to choose their punishment. This is critical for two reasons. First of all, it allows them to properly pay penance. When they are able to choose their punishment, they get to deem which way they want to use to help compensate for their crimes in the past. And second of all, redemption. Under the case in which they choose to do military service, they help to redeem what they did in the past. The goal of a crime, or what a crime is defined as, is when you infringe on somebody else's rights. But when you have military service to defend your country, you are defending those rights that once you took away. We think this redemption is important. That's why we stand on proposition. Our second layer of analysis here is instilling discipline and patriotism. We believe that the benefits of military missions are independent of the prisoner, but on the prisoner, it helps them because it instills discipline and patriotism. Under our model, we also help to provide education for those prisoners to ensure that they also gain more knowledge and gain more information. We also help them gain respect, because as members of the military, they become a respected part of not only the government, but along with part of the establishment. This helps them effectively with reintegration and has the impact of decreasing recidivism. For example, when we help to reintegrate people back into society, we help them allow themselves to improve their lives. By giving them a way to fit into society, they no longer feel the need to commit crime once again. That's the reason why there is recidivism in the status quo. That's why it's rising. But under the proposition world, we help to reintegrate them, bring them into society, and give them respect. Before I move on to my second point, I will now take a point of information.
Sir, do you think a rapist can redeem their sentence by serving for the country?
Okay, what we're saying is that if you're someone like a serial rapist or a serial killer, you are excluded, because under our model, if you have a life sentence or a death sentence, you aren't allowed to serve in the military. You cannot reduce a life sentence by a few years, because it is literally throughout the rest of your life. You cannot reduce a death sentence because you're going to be killed. In both of these instances, we argue that they do not fit under our model. So for people who are systemic abusers, who are child rapists or molesters, or people who have murdered many people, they don't get this application. This motion does not apply to them. Now with that in mind, let's move on to our second substantive argument, which is helping the common class. We define the common class as everyday citizens and prisoners, and there are 4 layers of analysis under this argument. The first layer of analysis is decreasing the need for a military draft. When prisoners can volunteer for these missions, the need of the government to take the involuntary citizens is diminished greatly. In a world where these dangerous missions can be fulfilled by prisoners who are willing to do them, we help to grant every single person more of a choice. Remember, at the end of the day, the biggest summary of Team Proposition's world is that we grant people more freedom of choice, more personal autonomy to ensure that they can do what they would like. If you choose to serve in the military, you should be allowed to do that. If you don't want to serve in the military, we believe you shouldn't. Yes?
Why is this form of punishment that is taken by the criminal itself more better than the previous punishment stated by the court, which is a legitimate form of institution supported by the government?
Okay, we're not arguing that any punishment is significantly better than the other, but what we're saying is that amongst these punishments, the prisoner should be allowed to choose. We think there are some practical benefits to allowing them to choose military service, but we also believe that even if you don't buy these benefits, you still see that in both worlds you get the right to choose. This is fundamentally human and fundamentally good. Our second layer of analysis is decreasing the need for involuntary prison labor. Now, I think we can all agree that prison labor, involuntary, is principally abhorrent, and we think that it protects the rights of all when it is excised or at least decreased in prisons right now. Around the world, a lot of countries have these violations of basic rights, and we think that forced prison labor is one of them. However, under the rules of the proposition, we hope to take more people out of the situations and giving them another alternative to choose how to serve out their sentence. Our third layer of analysis is decreased prison populations, and we contend that this helps everyone, because when there's less people in prison, every single member of society is helped. The first reason why this is so is because we decrease corruption. In the status quo, many prisons around the world have huge numbers of corruption because of the fact that these prison bosses and managers are able to launder money. But in a world where there's less overcrowding and less prisoners, these prisons receive less funding, and there's less incentive for corruption to occur. So in our world, there is less corruption, and beyond that, more oversight for those who are currently running prisons. Our second layer under this is that there are more resources devoted per prisoner. So in the status quo, we see a lot of different abuses attacking prisoners in the status quo. We see beatings, we see rapes, we see murders, but we believe that under Team Proposition's world, we help to decrease these abuses because there are more resources devoted towards every prisoner. And thirdly, increased security. In the status quo, we know that a lot of times, prisoners will escape from the prison, which causes a huge harm on society because they are people who have not served out their term yet. However, under our model, we diminish the possibility of this by increasing the amount of guards per prisoner to help ensure that there is an increased level of security. And our fourth and final layer of analysis is promoting the general welfare. We believe that when these dangerous missions can be carried out by individual governments to attack terrorists, for example, to help defend the interests of the people of their countries, we think this is principally and practically good. It increases security, it increases the protection of freedoms and rights, and it helps to ensure that all people in those countries are able to live a good, fulfilling life. At the end of this debate, we believe it boils down to redemption and danger, and Team Proposition wins on both of these. That's why you vote on the proposition. Thank you.
We'd like to thank the Prime Minister for that speech and welcome the Leader of Opposition to open the debate for Opposition bench. Here we go.
Today, Team Proposition takes death, disguises it as a lucrative offer, and offers it at the highest price, which is freedom, to a very vulnerable group of people and call themselves advocates of human rights, which is why we're very proud to oppose. Today, we win this debate if we can show you 3 things. Firstly, why it is wrong on principle due to coercion. Secondly, how it is against the best interest of people and prisoners. Thirdly, how it will make lives worse for these prisoners, which will be covered by my second speaker. I'll be exclusively talking about the first 2 points. Now, before I move on, let's talk about the point that I brought up about corruption. Firstly, corruption is the failure of the state to exercise their control in these prisons. And we believe that the way to solve this is not by putting lives of the prisoners on the line when the state failed to provide safe havens for the prisoners in the first place. And we believe that this is redundant, especially when there are other mechanisms that exist, such as putting these prisoners in jobs such as jobs within the prison where they make food or where they clean places, and these non-risky jobs that they can opt for. And that they can opt for to reduce overcrowding of prisons, or they can go into rehab so that they can be eventually reintegrated into society if they are qualified to do so, if their crime isn't of that severity. Now, moving on, let's talk about why it is principally wrong. And this is where we will also be tackling their argument about how these people should be given a choice of how they want to redeem for their, how they want to repent for their crimes. Now, under coercion, what do we have? Let's talk about how when these people are offered this choice, they are under duress, they're being forced to choose between an option of serving a long sentence versus going, putting their lives on the line so that they can get out earlier and spend more time with their family. We believe that this is a very crucial and immoral place to put an individual into, where they have to choose between their lives and their family. We believe there also exists the familial pressure on them, where they would be asked to opt for the military service rather than serving the prison time, because they feel like their lives are being cut short, that they're not being provided the opportunities that they would be perhaps if they go for the military combat. And we tell you that even though it seems like a conscious and rational decision on the prisoner's side, it is not so. Why? Because it is a manipulated decision by familial pressure and the pressure that they take onto themselves, and it is projected as they sign the contract.
Yeah.
Before I move on, yes?
We would tell you that your impacts that you're listing are not mutually exclusive. In your world, you have things like plea bargains that be able to get the prisoner outside of the sentence.
But that's the thing. When plea bargains are signed, the plea bargain does not involve these prisoners putting their lives on the line. But in this case, when you tell them to go into military combat, we're telling you that you are asking them to die just so they can have a better life. Secondly, under coercion, we have about how there's an ill-informed decision. They will not be knowing the consequences. What they see is the short-term benefit of it. They see that, they would get to spend more time with their family, or they would get to go back to their old lives. What they do not see is the long-term trauma that would ensue once they go into military combat. Now, we tell you, even if this coercion is this principle justification is not enough to convince you why this is important, we tell you about the double jeopardy that results in this. Firstly, why military combat is tantamount to torture. We are asking these people to go into areas where they have to risk their lives, walk through landmines, fight rebel groups, where they have limited resources, and they have to make it out alive. Tell you that these people, when people go into military, they have decided from a very early stage in their life. Suppose when they're 16 or 18, that's when the recruitment happens. These people prepare their entire life psychologically and physically, knowing that they will be going into combat at some point in life. I tell you that even if they provide the training, this will not amount to the ones that highly trained military officials get. And this is why they would not be benefited, that they are always put at a disadvantage. We further tell you about why this will not be benefiting these people in any way. Instead, they will be harming them. How so? Firstly, when they go into combat, we tell you when they return, there is no way that they can return in one piece or with a sane mind. First, how? First, either they will incur physical, they will be harmed physically, or they will be mentally traumatized, or thirdly, they will die. And we tell you, all these are the only possible outcomes after they come back, or even if they do come back from the military mission. And we tell you, this is not an option that we should be providing for them. And this is the very reason why death penalties are banned in so many countries and so many states. So just because you're disguising it as a form of choice or as a form of reduction of prison statement, we tell you this is that is still morally abhorrent. Now, secondly, why this is because you're punishing prisoners who are already serving their statement. They're already repenting. It is reprehensible to punish them twice, despite what crime they have committed. We admit the crimes that they have committed is wrong, but we believe that they're already serving the sentence for it. There is no need to punish them twice for what they have already done already. You're basically exploiting them for their vulnerability. Moving on to my second argument, and that which my second speaker will be further elaborating on later, is because even if you don't win on principle alone, the second argument is that how it will be going against the interests of the state and the people. So when they bring up the argument about how people about rapists, there is a flaw in their example because rapists, in most countries, do not serve life sentences. They serve like 10 or 20 years. But even then, if you consider any other crime, if rapists are excluded, these people, why this reflects negatively in the view of people is because when a sentence was passed in court, the judge and the people involved and the parties involved agreed that this individual will be serving a time of this period. And there is a set time limit for a reason, because the judge deemed it possible that if this person serves time for this amount of time, they will be a better individual, or they will be better able to reflect on their crimes and what they have done and how they have negatively impacted people. I tell you, once you shorten their prison statement, this does not happen because they do not get the time to reflect on themselves, and they do not get to serve the prison time, and this is just a shortcut to getting out of it. And let me tell you about how these people might turn violent or aggressive towards the people once they get out of the military mission. And because of all this, we've already told you about how it is principally wrong and how it goes against the best interest of the state and the people. We've told you about how even though the proposition tries to sell this to you as a lucrative offer, it is just wrong on every single ground. And this is why we win the debate today. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the Leader of Opposition for that speech and welcome the Deputy Prime Minister to conclude the debate for government affairs here.
Tells you that they're supposed to be protecting the interests of the prisoners. That was in fact one of their burdens. But then their second substantive comes up here and tells you that prisoners need to be serving out the entirety of their sentence with no opportunity for redress. We ask them to take a stance. Do they care about the redemption of prisoners or not? Side proposition tells you very clearly that we allow prisoners to have a second chance, and that by simply giving them a choice of redemption does not necessarily nullify the crimes they've done. It just allows them to pick the type of punishment that they want. We're not letting them go off scot-free. We're just allowing them to have basic human rights associated with being a person in society in general. Two key things in this speech: first, pointing out some assumptions that side opposition makes, and then providing the third substantive argument on side proposition. So going to the key assumptions made in today's round. The first key assumption that side opposition makes is that they assume that this coercion that they speak of is unique to the proposition world. It's not. We see that right now they even outline for you how there are other ways for you to reduce your sentence. There are things like plea bargains. There are things like taking not risky jobs. There are other ways, no thank you. There are other ways of actually being able to reduce your sentencing. We would argue that if by their logic, if coercion is true and that prisoners are making decisions under duress, then that means agreeing to take a risky job or a non-risky job or agreeing to do a plea bargain is also going to be coercive in nature. So would side opposition ban all of these ways of reducing the sentence as well? We would say that they probably wouldn't, and so this line of logic falls flat. Furthermore, we see that in terms of looking at the military in general, side opposition says that there's going to be some long-term trauma that these prisoners are going to be experiencing. We see that's, again, not unique to the world of proposition, considering that there are civilians that willingly sign up for the military as well. We see that the military often offers educational benefits, retirement benefits. There are a plethora of reasons as to why people would sign up for the military. We contend that these civilians go in with the same, know exactly what they're signing up for, and prisoners would too. We don't see as to why this is going to be principally objectionable when we see that this already occurs in society today. Simply giving prisoners a choice is not morally abhorrent. We think that that's actually principally good because we allow them to pick how they pay their penance. We still ensure that they pay penance overall, and that's going to be one of the biggest benefits coming out of side proposition. The second key assumption that side opposition makes in today's round, I'll take you in a second, is that they assume that prisoners are forced into this. The motion clearly uses the word voluntary, meaning prisoners are exceedingly aware of the danger they're signing up for, and they are aware of the dangers that they seek. We should allow them to give them this choice. We hear no analysis from side opposition as to why they should be given this choice. But I think one of you had a point of information.
Yes. Now, I understand that plea bargains does not involve prisoners risking their lives, and the plea bargains usually involve them being under observation. And secondly, are you saying that no form of coercion exists on this prisoner when they are making this choice?
Actually, my argument is the opposite. We would say that if coercion is true, coercion is also present in other facets of prison lifestyle, in other ways to reduce their sentencing. So simply saying that coercion exists is not a reason to vote against side proposition, unless you would also like to outlaw things like plea bargains and things like reducing sentences in general, because those are coercive in nature. If you take a stance on that, we will engage. Furthermore, going on to the second assumption in today's round, that they assume that these prisoners are forced into this. We see that because this is a voluntary action, there's nothing principally objectionable about this. This is material we presented to you in the first substantive that Raymond explained to you very eloquently about how we have a right to choose, and that this right to choose is a fundamental right. Because if you're going to be paying penance anyway, we should probably allow the prisoners who are going to be changing their lifestyles to pick how they want to do so. Simply by mandating that they sit in prison for X amount of years doesn't necessarily achieve our goals of rehabilitation. We think that giving these prisoners some sort of purpose, giving them something to do, giving them some sort of action, is a more constructive means of paying penance in the first place. But third and finally, there's a clear contradiction in the case of side opposition. They say that prisoners are going to be punished twice in their second substantive argument, and that they need to be protected. But then they say that people like serial rapists should be forced to carry out the entirety of their sentences. We contend that in a world where you have a choice between engaging in a dangerous military mission and finishing out your sentence, that you can still have both. You can have going to a military mission and then just having a shorter sentence. You can still gain the benefits, if there are any, about uniquely sitting in a prison cell and thinking about your life. We're just saying that you should have the ability to choose whether you want to risk your life, because it's not a decision to be taken lightly. Now, going on to the third substantive argument on side proposition, about fostering reintegration. Two layers of analysis here. First, that it gives a purpose to prisoners. Most prisoners in our society aren't demons and don't deserve the negative characterization they're often given in society. These prisoners can also be those who committed minor offenses, like theft or drug possession, who get disproportionately longer sentences because of structural things present in the criminal justice system. Things like the criminal justice system often throwing racial minorities into jail disproportionately to white counterparts. We see that these people deserve redemption. They deserve a chance to do good for society. And the fact that they made a minor mistake should not be absolving them of that right. Furthermore, we see that giving a purpose to prisoners helps them better atone for their crimes, because we allow them to take action in paying penance, instead of simply wallowing in their guilt. We see that the majority of criminals are not going to be the demonized characterization that side opposition paints for you. We see that a lot of them aren't going to be violent criminals. They're not going to be serial rapists. They're going to be people that committed a mistake in their life and violated a federal law or some sort of state law, but they should still have an actual way to atone for their crimes. The second layer of analysis under this point is that this changes the public perception of prisoners by giving them this choice. We see that prisoners that are actively helping society help show other members of society that prisoners can be of use to the community in protecting their national defense. We see that there are various groups in society today and political parties around the world that have a very anti-prisoner stance. These look like Republicans in the US. These look like the National Front in France. We see that because these political parties are going to be engaging, I'll take you in a second, are going to be engaging in this anti-prisoner rhetoric, we can actually help change the mindset that people have by giving them a choice to do good for society. I'll take you in a
Do you support prisoners working for MNCs as cheap labor?
We would say that everything is voluntary. This motion is not talking about cheap labor. This motion is talking about military missions. We are saying that prisoners who are aware of the risks have the choice in order to actually engage in them. We think that things like cheap labor are kind of outside of the scope of this motion. Furthermore, we think that these negative perceptions of criminals that demonize them actually make it harder for them to reintegrate into society. Now, why should prisoners be able to reintegrate? It's because prisoners are still people. This is something Raynor explained to you in his first speech. Because they are people, they deserve fundamental human rights. If it was true that we as a society thought that prisoners don't deserve any rights, then we wouldn't even bother putting them in prisons in the first place to rehabilitate them. We would go for more stronger penalties. Because we understand that rehabilitation is a vital part of integrating in society, we give them that option. Why not just give them another option as a part of that and let them choose what they want to do, as long as they're still paying penance? We simply get no engagement from side opposition about why giving them this choice is fundamentally bad, and that's what I challenge them to do in the next speech. That's why I'm so proud to propose.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for that speech. Welcome to the Deputy Leader of Opposition to continue the debate for opposition bench. Hear, hear.
When you are born into a poor family, you are not allowed to go on and do child labor. The main reason being that you are exploited at the end of the day. The main reason being that you don't, this is a form of coercive choice. And that at the end of the day, even if you feel like this is the best choice for you, we as the society, we as the state, think that this is not the best alternative for that person to take. Two arguments in my speech. Firstly, how life gets far much more worse for the prisoners. Secondly, how we perpetrate the discrimination against the poor. But before moving on, point of rebuttal. Firstly, they come up and create a very big contradiction in their case, where the second speaker comes up and tells us that look, coercion does exist on both sides of the state, but upon asking a POI, she then changes her stance and saying that look, this is a very voluntary choice. We really feel that that contradiction is not, that they are very non-clear on what their stance is. But more importantly, they come up and talk to us about human rights and supporting and advocating for human rights. But we see at the end of the day, when we tell you that this is not supporting human rights, when you let a prisoner go into a place where he is in a life-threatening position.
Sir.
Not taken. So let's tackle the idea on coercion. Even if we were to agree that coercion never takes place, even though we tell you that this is not an informed decision because you never really have all the information present here and because you're under duress, even if we were to take this scenario, we tell you this is a form of double jeopardy that takes place under the prisoner's situation that they never really come up and talk to us about. That is the principal argument that we tell you. So what is double jeopardy? In double jeopardy, we tell you that a person, we as a state, we as the world, have agreed in certain states that the death penalty is wrong because it is a form of pain and it is a form of pain to the prisoner. We agree that when you as a prisoner are taken into prison, the torture is wrong. We tell you that when that person actually goes into the military field, as the first speaker have told you that these are dangerous military situations, are life-threatening, it means that there is a 100% guarantee that the person would be injured, that 100% guarantee that the person would be wounded. In that scenario, that is a form of torture that we're never really going to go on and support. But secondly, we tell you that that prisoner has already served time is already serving for the punishment that has been given. They understand that when you are going to a dangerous military situation, there is a form of another form of punishment that we think that is reprehensible as a human life that should not be placed upon them. So first, moving to my first point, how life gets far worse for the prisoners, and this tackles their main idea and the stance that they actually give them a second chance. We tell you under our scenario, when you do have this situation is that life of the prisoner gets far more worsened. So why? Because understand the main incentive the military have of recruiting these prisoners in the first place. Firstly, because those people are cheap. Because why so? Because they do not have to provide them any sort of military training. They do not have to provide them any sort of money, and that saves resources for them. Even if we were to agree with their model, where they tell us that they get the training necessary, we tell that these dangerous military situations are so much more severe that a person can never really go into that and take proper action without getting a year-long training situation. That a person can never really go on and learn how to tackle those situations and take the best necessary choices when you are not as trained and experienced enough to tackle this scenario. So in that scenario, that person is not trained enough. But secondly, the incentive militaries have to take care of take in prisoners is that they don't have any sort of accountability towards it, because they could go on and tell the prisoners that look, you are serving time for the punishment you have given, that you are going on and you are going as a criminal, and therefore you are a criminal, and therefore you do not have any sort of accountability upon you. In this situation, when you never have the accountability, that's much more harmful. So what are the harms that we talk about? Firstly, is that is a form of exploitation that takes place upon that particular prisoner. Because understand, we do not support forced labor, because at the end of the day, when you are working without pay, when you're working for something that has no benefit to you in whatsoever, because at the opposite scenario, you're still getting punished, that is a way of exploitation that we tell you. But before moving on, yes ma'am.
The word voluntary in the motion says that the prisoners would be able to know of all of the risks. Why is giving them a choice so exploitative?
So even if, as I've already told you in my principle, even if they have all the information and the voluntary choice, because of the double jeopardy that exists, that is more responsible, as we have shown you through the example of child labor. So second harm is that you never really get support from the state, as they've already agreed to us that this is a very life-threatening situation, and that means there's a 100% guarantee that they would be injured. So this, as this is a form of punishment for those groups of people, it ensures that there's no insurance policies for those people who are going to the military, because they see that they're no much more accountable to that particular criminal, because that criminal is seen as someone who has betrayed the state. That criminal is seen as someone who is against the state. So in that scenario, the military has no form of accountability to go on and give him any sort of insurance policies when he is suffering from an injury, or going on and giving him special counseling situations when he is suffering from PTSD. Third harm is that he never really gets any honor for the sacrifice that he has made. Understand that in the current scenario, in the current situation, when you go on and sacrifice for give your life for your country, or you go on and take action so that it may benefit your country at the end of the day, we think that they're actually giving some form of respect, therefore giving an honorary status, such as a heart medal, for their sacrifice. In this scenario, these prisoners are seen as so reprehensible that these prisoners are seen as such a criminal that they're never really given that form of honorary status. Why so? Because if you would go on and give a rape person an honorary status for a rape convict, for an honorary status for serving the country, that is a form of harm to that particular victim. That is a form of harm to those victims who have been suffered from this criminal and who is now being venerated under their side of the world. So that doesn't really take place. So what are the impacts of this argument? Before moving on, yes ma'am.
They're not getting honorary status. It's just a reduction in their sentencing. I fail to see how you make this massive link chain into this
So,
conduct.
coming from that and arguing on that, what are the impacts of this? The first impact is that they live a life of pain even after getting released. Because even if they are injured, they're never really getting the insurance policy or never really getting the best form of cure. But more than that, they have to suffer from PTSD that is quite incurable and other sorts of mental diseases. But secondly, it forms an internal guilt within themselves and they feel bad about themselves, and this tackles their POI, where we tell you that they are still stigmatized within society, that even though they are not recognized, even though they have served for the military, they're not recognized in this situation. And because of not getting that form of recognition, they build up an aggression within themselves where they feel like they have been betrayed by the state, and they feel like the state has not kept up to their promises. But second argument, where it perpetuates discrimination against the poor, they come up and likely to tell us that look, it forms like military drafts. We tell you that in this situation, people who do not involuntarily go and are drafted into the military, they do not have to go into dangerous situations, do not have to risk their life. These prisoners have to do that. But more importantly, they claim these prisoners as being secondary class citizens of being replaced by normal citizens. We tell that the majority of prisoners are poor people, and they're seen as people who are quite replaceable as the normal civilians. They're seen as people like who are only going to do the dangerous jobs, and other civilians are not going to do those jobs. The impact of this is that the stigmatization against prisoners are much more worse because they are already because they can't really find the job, and they're seen as people who are secondary citizens who have to take care of jobs that normal citizens can't. Under our side of the world, we make a better world for those prisoners. We think it is more reprehensible to allow them to make this choice because it's under coercion, but even so if they make it, it's double jeopardy. We win this debate. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition and now welcome the Government Whip to begin summarizing the debate for Government Whip. Cheer, cheer.
In my hometown of Surprise, Arizona, prison labor looks like prisoners in heavy jumpsuits working 10-hour days digging fields in 90-degree heat. Passing by them year after year, faces began to look familiar. I once began to question, what if they had been offered a choice of their punishment to be able to redeem their status? Perhaps recidivism in my state would not be such a prominent issue. Perhaps we would see that prisoners could actually fulfill their status and integrate back into the society. In our world, we give the prisoners options to be able to integrate back into their world, to become a valued member of society, and to be someone of value to their family. In the opposition world, they're constricted to the problematic prison system that we see in the status quo. In this speech, I'll be doing a couple of things. The first is I'm going to be discussing 2 strategic flaws side opposition has made before moving on to giving 2 key questions that summarize this debate. The first on which side holds true to the principle, and the second on which side benefits the prisoners. Then I'll be moving on to comparing the 2 worlds. But let's move on to the strategic mistakes made by side opposition. The first strategic mistake is on the underlying assumption that we are forcing prisoners to partake in this military sentence, and they see that that's really bad. We think that this is a pretty big misconception because we tell you in the very motion that we are debating today that takes place on a voluntary basis, meaning that within our model we told you these prisoners will go through combative training to be able to make sure that they are fulfilled in what they are doing, to make sure that they are aware of the dangers that they are entering to in order to obtain something of a reduced sentence. We think that that's a pretty fair way of being able to address today's debate. But their second misconception that was ultimately detrimental to their case is that they present you this picture that manipulates you into thinking that side proposition is throwing prisoners into some war zone. We tell you the answer to this is just simply no. We tell you that through our model, we see that this is actually not going to be happening. But rather, they tell you this is a story about exploitation. We tell you, first off, it's voluntary. These are some things that people are going to be doing in the first place, meaning that exploitation is not taking place because you're not handing the power to the government or to the corporations that run this prison system, but rather to the people, the prisoners within this system. We tell you that even if, we say that even if you tell them that they can't get any pay, their pay is based solely upon the idea of monetary value and healthcare positions. We think that what you're actually achieving and what the success and pay that you give these prisoners is a reduced sentence, meaning that this is not exploitation. But let's move on to the first question of today's debate, but before that, a point.
Now, you do know reintegration programs already exist that do not involve people putting their lives at risk. And how is this an exclusive benefit in your world? And why not just offer these prisoners those non-risky reintegration programs rather than this?
We tell you first off that these reintegration programs have been highly unsuccessful. That's why you see things like an increase in recidivism in the first place. That's why you see things like corruption in a prison system. But secondly, even if you don't buy that, we would tell you that in our world, you actually give them the option to be able to have more of a choice in which alternatives they would like to take in order to reduce their sentence. Nothing is forced here. But on to our first question, which is which side holds true to the principle. We want to make our stance explicitly clear in today's debate. We believe in giving prisoners the voluntary option to redeem their status in society. We tell you that there are 2 ways of achieving redemption. The first is prisoners fulfilling their sentence that they have been told. The second is choosing to participate in a dangerous missions that instill an image of them of protecting citizens of their own country. We think that these are both valued forms of being able to obtain this redemption. But we tell you that once you're a prisoner, this doesn't mean that you suddenly stop becoming a human. The prisoners still have a right to autonomy. When side opposition tries to take away this autonomy, we see that this actually comes down to a big problem here, meaning that the prisoners are constricted to one way of life. We think that when it comes down to deciding their own punishment, they ought to have a choice. We tell you that this doesn't look like asking them what they want for dinner, but rather what form of appropriate punishment they would like to continue. But opposition says that that's principally wrong, says that putting a prisoner at risk in the long term. We tell you that there's a couple of things here. The first is that they're choosing between two things. It's pretty simple as it sounds. It's a choice. They get to choose whether or not they would like to put their life at risk in order to get a reduced sentence. But secondly, if you do believe that that's true, we tell you that they shouldn't be in the military. If you do believe that this is true, we think that there shouldn't be a military at all. Because at the average day, a citizen who chooses to engage in the military is putting their lives at risk and getting all the problems that side opposition tells you. We think that simply telling a prisoner that it's too risky to go into the military is the same thing that you could apply to everyday citizens that are a part of our military. We think that in the long term, our model solves this because we're not taking advantage of these prisoners, but rather giving them an actual advantage to be able to reduce their sentence in an area where they'll be able to engage and excel in what they do. But moving on to our second question, which is which side actually benefits the prisoners? But your point.
Why do you ban child labor when you know that when the child thinks it's better for him?
I would say that, first off, we don't think that any argument about child labor is significant or relevant to this debate, but if it falls principally consistent with what we're talking about and giving the people a choice and being able to succeed a better life, we think that that's pretty fair and we would stand for that. But moving on to our second question, which is which side benefits the prisoners? We tell you that we have to question, why do we have prisons in the first place? We have them because we believe in rehabilitating prisoners and integrating them back into society. If that wasn't the purpose, we wouldn't put time and energy into our prison systems, but rather sentence things like capital punishment. But opposition says, no, this is problematic. Coercion exists with this kind of treatment. We see a mischoice. We shouldn't be allowing them to have this kind of choice. We tell you, first off, this is a voluntary method. No coercion is going to be actually happening here because there are actual alternative methods, and that's something very important that side proposition tells you. We tell you that even if their world is the thing that you have, you see that if they choose not to engage in a dangerous military mission, what they'll actually have is choices like plea bargains. That's why you see that coercion exists in their world, with being pressured to take other jobs that incentivize good behavior so that they can get a reduced sentence. Reduced sentences are able to occur on both platforms. However, in our world, we're giving the prisoners a more applicable and easy choice to make about being able to gain a shorter sentence. We think that even if you do believe that coercion is very prominent within our choice, we have the coercion from, and I tell you that we get these coercions from outside factors like their families. We stand for this extra option. We stand for the idea that prisoners would be able to make the choice for themselves and for their families that want them to return home to be able to decide which choice it is. The opposition then continues on to list off a myriad of harms that the military is going to give, and that's a lot of problems. We say, okay, this is applicable to literally anybody that has an interest in joining the military. They give you no reasoning as to why this is something essential to vote for, but rather something that would belong to a separate motion. We think that what it comes down to in today's debate is evaluating the two worlds that are presented for us. In the proposition, we give you a plethora of options to be able to change or reduce their sentences. We think it's important to value the autonomy and the lives that prisoners have in the status quo. It's tough to get out of this. It's tough to get good behavior. It's tough to obtain a plea bargain and to be able to minimize these kinds of sentences. Allowing them to have this option gives them the chance to be able to redeem themselves, create a status for themselves, integrate themselves back into society. In opposition, you're constricted to one form with very little leniency. We think the choice has become very clear in today's debate. The choice is to vote for the proposition. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the government for that speech and welcome the opposition whip to begin summarizing the debate for opposition bench. Here, here.
reiterating our stance on side opposition, right? We want to help the prisoners make a rational decision and reintegrate into society. So both of my classes will depend on our burdens, right? Firstly, help them make rational decisions, and secondly, reintegrating into society. So firstly, on the point of rational decisions, right? So side proposition gives us a lot and goes on to harp on about autonomy and how important choice is and how important a human right, rights activists there, how important this is to, and what a basic human right this is, right? We tell you, we give you the analogy. So for example, today, if a gang goes up to you and takes your family hostage and asks you to rob a bank, sure, side proposition could go on and say that, look, this was an active choice made on your part. You did have autonomy over yourself. You did have your choice. But we from side opposition would say that it was a coerced choice, right? Because they held your family hostage to make you do something that was wrong, right? To put your life in danger,
Yeah.
We tell you that that's the exact same thing side proposition is proposing today, right? They tell us that you actually end up holding these prisoners' freedom hostage, and you put their life in danger on that basis, right? But then they tell us that, look, it will be a completely voluntary choice, because look, they will be receiving training. Right? But we tell you that this training is ultimately not equivalent to the training of a general, right? My first speaker has clearly shown to you the difference, right?
Yeah.
These people who have the mental idea of going into the military have been training from long before, right? We tell you that you cannot compare these two or conflate these two, right? But secondly, we tell you that even if they do receive this training, not taken, ma'am, I'll ask for it. Even if they do receive this training, the people who ultimately recruit these prisoners, these people have no accountability. What do I mean by this? So, for example, a common civilian who wants to join up the army, they will have to given proper equipment, proper guns, proper safety equipment. But in the case of prisoners, they tend to believe that these are second-class citizens, something that my second speaker has clearly stated. When you believe that these prisoners have lost their inherent value to life, these people who recruit these prisoners ultimately have no accountability and ultimately have decreased safety for these prisoners, right? But secondly, we tell you, I'll ask for it, ma'am. You put these prisoners in double jeopardy, right? Something that remains completely uncontested from their side, right? What do I mean by this? We tell you that you doubly negatively affect their lives, but this ultimately does nothing to rehabilitate them, right? So we give you the example of Finland, right? Finland and any other rehabilitation center of the world does not incorporate death or any kind of life-threatening situation into a rehabilitation process. For them to make that claim, they need to show you a mechanism as to how life-threatening situations lead to rehabilitation, right? But lastly, we talk about, I'll ask for it, but lastly we talk about, they bring up the example of plea bargain, right? We tell you that plea bargains are ultimately very, very different from being recruited into the military, right? Because plea bargains incentivize good behavior, in contrast to where your life is literally being threatened, and when your life is literally being threatened because of being put into a dangerous mission, right? But before moving on to reintegration and how we do that better, yes, your POI, ma'am.
We would tell you that the entire crux of your case is based upon the fact that prisoners are irrational actors who can't make decisions for themselves. We tell you to engage with what we're telling you about how they can actually do this because they care about their sentence.
They do care about their sentence and they do care about their freedom, which is precisely why they choose and they opt into putting their lives in danger rather than just fulfilling their, rather than just living through their sentence, right? But we tell you that the sentence in itself is a very important form of rehabilitation. And also a very important part of reintegration, which I'll be talking about now. So firstly, we tell you that realize that the court is at the pinnacle of the justice system, right? We take the court to be at the pinnacle of any kind of justice system. So we tell you that any kind of punishment dished out by the judge or dished out by the jury is ultimately not arbitrary. It's very case specific, right? It's given because of the crime and the specificity of the crime. So for example, a rapist and a person who committed just a petty crime would not be given the same sentence, right? We tell you that the importance of this sentence is the fact that they get to reflect on their life and they get to reflect on their crime. Something that you do not get under their world, where you literally put their lives on danger, right? But secondly, we tell you that even if we take their best case scenario and say that these people are making a rational decision, we tell that it's still problematic because it harms rehabilitation. So prisoners, criminals essentially, when they did commit the crime, they knew of the repercussions, right? But they still chose to commit it. This gives a very clear image, a clear idea of how of the characterization of prisoners. Even despite knowing the consequences, they choose to opt into certain risky situations, right? Given this being the characterization of prisoners, it's very likely that given the consequences of the literally loss of their life, they still might opt into going to these dangerous situations, right? Which we tell you is ultimately problematic because they don't realize the gravity of their crime, right? They don't get to reflect on their crime. If they live through the dangerous situation without any physical injury or without incurring any traumatic experiences, we still tell you that that is problematic because they don't reflect on their crime. They don't get to realize how they have damaged or given problems to the society, right? But then we tell you that the stigma then they talk about stigma, right? But we tell you that the stigma specifically hinders reintegration. Right? Because the wider society believes that these people without rehabilitation are not safe yet, right? So for example, if I know that a rapist has, without fulfilling his sentence, he is scot-free, I would not be more sympathizing and I would not empathize with him, right? We tell you that the broader society won't believe that these people have been properly rehabilitated, right? But then they talk about honor, right? We tell that giving these prisoners honor is problematic because they ultimately disrespect the people whom this criminal harmed, right? But for all these reasons, because we want the best for prisoners, we give them human rights, we'll help them make rational decisions and reintegrate into the society. We tell you that vote for side opposition. Very proud to
Thank the opposition for that speech and welcome the opposition to reply to conclude summarizing the debate for opposition bench. Hear, hear.
Side government in this debate wanted to play it very safe, where they ignore our principle of the idea about double jeopardy. They wanted to strawman our case and tell us that the only reason we have our cases hinged on the idea is because of the idea of coercion. We did it that is not the case. We told you of an even-if model, even if it is not a form of coercion. We told you about the double jeopardy that really exists within society, where you are going to send these prisoners to a platform where they are going to go to the form of torture culture that we think is morally reprehensible. We have told you of examples of why even if a child thinks that it is an informed choice that he makes by working for a family, where he thinks that it is also able to work for his family and that benefits him at the end of his day, we tell you as the state, we ban it because we know the consequences with it. We know that it is morally reprehensible to make them go on and work in those situations. We tell you on those grounds, we already win this debate. But let's tackle them on their ideas or on the best case ideas. So firstly, they talk about a situation where they're better able to provide rehabilitation. We tell you that under their side of the world, they support advocating for human rights. But we tell you that this is not the way to support for human rights. This is not the way to make them rehabilitated. We have rehabilitation institutions where they could go on and get themselves better, not by putting them in danger. We think that is something that is a more reprehensible thing that they propose on their side of the house. But secondly, they come up and tell us that this reduces the stigmatization of prisoners. We tell you that the moment you can reduce that stigmatization is the moment when you have that particular form of information released to the public of them sacrificing for the state. We have told you by my speech and by the third speaker's speech that information is never released out into the public for two main reasons. Firstly, because it is a form of harm to the particular victim where she or he sees that the prisoner who has done harm to him is now serving the country and is being supported by the state. But secondly, we see that the particular forms, we see that the military and the government tells them that you are equalizing the harm that you have done to the state, that this is not a form of benefit you are committing to the state, but rather equalizing it for the harm you have done by actually harming people through activities that are villainous. But more importantly, we have shown you that under our side, that stigmatization also increases further. So that this tackles with the idea of replacing people who are drafted. They tell us of a world that they want to replace people who are drafted, and that people who are drafted, we tell you that people who are actually drafted are never really going into life-threatening situations and never really have to go on and have to suffer from the pain that prisoners have to do on our side of the world. But more importantly, they actually want to replace these citizens and by prisoners and give them the label of being secondary class citizens, where they have to take care of the dangerous situation where the normal civilians can't do so. And therefore we think that is quite reprehensible from their side to come in, where they are seen as secondary situation. And under our side, when the narrative exists that the prisoners are people who only take care of dangerous jobs, is the moment you see prisoners as secondary citizens and increase the stigmatization against them, are more unlikely to give them the jobs they want and are more unlikely to integrate them into society. But more importantly, we have shown you, even if this is a voluntary choice, the harm that exists with it, the harm of the prisoners that is incurred within him, because he is exploited in a way that we tell you that he is exploited in a way where he gets no benefit for it in whatsoever way. We tell you that he has to live with a pain of PTSD, but that is never really solved by the state, that actually lets him to go out into the public. At the end of this debate, we show you how we make life better for prisoners, how we tell you that it's quite morally and principally wrong to let prisoners make this choice. Vote for Team Mastermind. Thank you.
I think the opposition replies to that speech. Welcome the government reply to our debate to the bench. Go to the bench.
The POIs in our opponent's third speech is kind of like the military action under today's motion. They are voluntarily taken. This is only one out of 3 misconceptions that we've seen in today's round. The second one is this. They believe that we should be quarreling about education, but that's not what this debate is about. If you want to argue about our model and you want to bicker about that, fine by us, but we support education. We are debating true to what the motion is about, which is saying that we want people to, quote, voluntarily participate. Under this assumption, we believe that people will be educated. That's why we stand by our model. And third of all, we believe that reflection on crime can still happen, because under our world, after people serve their entire sentence, it's not like they suddenly just leave and don't go back to prison. After your mission, you go back to prison, only with a 20% reduction. You still have plenty of time to reflect on your crime. With these misconceptions out of the way, let's look towards what this debate fundamentally boils down to. First is the principal arguments, and second is the practical. The proposition wins in both of these areas. So first, let's look at the principle of today's debate. It is the principle principle of choice and autonomy versus the principle of coercion. Now, the proposition world doesn't force anyone to do anything. Like we say, the motion says voluntarily. We are sticking by the motion. But even beyond that, even if you don't buy this argument, we say that this is not unique, because in the opposition world, we also have things that are involuntary and coercive. For example, plea bargaining. But the difference is that plea bargaining doesn't benefit society. Military service absolutely does. And even beyond that, there is no engagement on our idea of the freedom of choice. They just bring up their own principle. We think the freedom of choice and the freedom to choose is still standing on our side of the house. That's an independent reason to vote for us. And even if you believe in the harmful effects of this choice, remember that this is a choice that outweighs the idea of any impacts of this. Remember, children cannot consent because they don't understand what they're consenting to when they volunteer for child labor. But under our rules, these are not children, these are prisoners. Secondly, let's talk about the idea of human rights. Now, we say that military service is not torture, and under your rules, you literally called it torture. But under that assumption, that means that military service should be banned. We definitely disagree with this. Many choose this because of the benefits, and under the proposition world, the benefit we offer to prisoners is that we reduce their sentence. This is something that they get to choose. And beyond that, even if you don't believe this argument, remember this is voluntary. If you don't want to do it, you can just say no. In real torture, you can't just say, I reject this. That's not how torture works. And finally, exploitation is non-unique to their side of the house. Remember, we are debating about the spirit of this motion, and the spirit is asking us to think about whether or not people deserve the right to choose. And finally, let's talk about double jeopardy, the entire crux of their entire argument. First, no, this is not double jeopardy. It is not a double sentence. After you serve your military mission, we decrease the amount of years on your sentence. Secondly, you can still keep the sentence you received from a judge. You get to choose. In either world, whether you buy or you don't buy their argument, remember, you vote with a prop. But on the practical argument, it's conclusively clear. You vote with a proposition. First, we tell you that we help society. There is no engagement on this argument. We reduce the need for a draft, and we decrease the prison population. This empirically benefits society. Secondly, we help to reintegrate prisoners. There is also no engagement from our opponents. This is really important, because by giving prisoners a way to reform, we also help to ensure that there is a brighter future for them. Secondly, we don't take away other rehabilitation programs like our opponents insinuate. We still want rehabilitation. We think this is simply another form of it. And finally, this is the goal of prison. It is to reform people. That's why it's so important that we give options. Under the world of the opposition, they only give you the status quo. Under the world of the proposition, we give you change and we give you choice. And finally, we talk about the lack of training. Now, they say that they don't have enough training, kind of like a general. They aren't doing the job of the general. They are doing the job of the soldier. And under our model, we give enough training for these people so that they can have the equipment and the training necessary to go into these battles. At the end of the day, remember what this debate is actually about. It's about choice and it's about people. In the comparative world, the proposition gives you choice and we help society and we help rehab. That's why you vote with us. Thank you.
All speakers are great and spirited debate. Cross the aisle, shake hands, and then we're going to announce the results of the GA.
Thank you.
Guys, you have to leave.
Okay.
We'll be back.